What's up, y'all? Gonna make a little announcement here. I've been working on Tootsie since last September. Some of you might think this is about one thing, but I'm happy to say it's about something else. And I'm working on a book, and I'm very excited about this book because it's something that I've been very passionate about. Um, I went to my undergrad and my graduate degrees in Florida, and I felt to some degree like the only thing that I really missed was some kind of rhythm course. I felt like in academia for music, we specifically shy away from being very specific about how we work on our time and rhythms. And I mean, percussionists, you've got a different story to tell. So bear with me here. But what I'm trying to do with my book is kind of connect a couple of things that I felt were really important to me as a musician and as a human being, more the latter than the former, in order to kind of form a relationship with my practice and practicing or crafting. Another way to put this is that, like, I saw one of those little sound bites the other day about being in the moment, and somebody was like, turn the music off and just be. And I thought about that, and I don't have a specific criticism for that other than, sometimes the music is the moment, and how we express ourselves in that moment is very important because it can be the truth. It can be clouded by our emotional state or how we're feeling. And I think that's an important thing to talk about. So in my book that I'm working on the connection between forming, I would say, a daily ritual, practice habits, with relationship to rhythm itself and your mental health, and how these two things can tie in together, not as any sort of prescriptive advice for any mental health issues that anybody may be facing in the book, but maybe just a way to reconnect physically in an embodied way to music itself. I'm going to be working with some of my great colleagues. My friend Chris Belt offered to help me out, and he actually just texted me, which is really funny. Do some research for this and talk to some world renowned, hopefully, experts on the research part of this, and doing some interviews, because I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome when I started writing this, but then I thought about how important it is to connect kind of the self-help nature of books like Effortless Mastery and The Musician's Way, and then the actual physically embodied part of practice that I think is very important, and I think is easy to forget, especially when, your brain can kind of get in the way. And it's too funny because right now I'm getting like a million updates from various things. The air conditioner's turning on, which I think is all a part of it. And it's about connecting yourself with your practice and finding ways to get into those flow states, which I'll extrapolate upon in the book itself and be very specific about how we can start to do things even if we don't own a drum set or a percussion instrument, or if we don't have maybe the greatest foundational background in practicing maybe more difficult rhythmic concepts. I think part of the generation that we're in, there's a serious divide between financial stability and the freedom to do what you want artistically, especially depending on either A, where you live in the country, B, your education, C, the kind of financial connections you have. And this can all be wrapped up in mental health things that, either you're your own worst enemy, someone else can take advantage of not having, have the privilege of not having any sort of mental illness or mental health problems. I would say privilege is a more appropriate way to put it, um, because it is easier to progress and practice for long stretches of time when your brain is working correctly, or I should say, not intrusively, um, or maybe is working in a way that is more cohesive to your whole being. So the idea behind this book, in a lot of ways, is to um, really find a space for you and me and anybody who's interested in progressing in a rhythmic way, to start to broaden our ears and our practices, to be more holistic and to be less about me and my, and more about how can I listen more deeply, and how can I discover kind of what's going on rhythmically with the people around me. Because I think once you get to a certain level, you realize, uh, if you haven't already, and a lot of people that are, at a certain space may hear this and be like, oh, yeah, of course, but everybody has good and bad days. And to evaluate those good and bad days as being a good or bad person is not what we're here to do. We're here to express ourselves. So going back to that, like, being in the moment thing, we need to find a way to express ourselves clearly without letting everything else get in. But if that other stuff gets in, how do we translate that in a way that's clear and concise, so our audience can understand what we're trying to say without it being whatever else is going on with us? Um, Especially if we have a job to do, if we're performing with someone else and we're performing their music. And this goes back to that privilege idea, that we don't always have the luxury to perform our own music and our own expression of self, like free improvisation. We could make a lifetime out of that if we're fortunate. But I think there's certain fundamentals that we have to be able to really have solidified. And sometimes those fundamentals, I don't think, are made as readily available as we'd like to believe. There's going to be discussions about kind of perfect pitch and its relationship to perfect time. I think some people are born with the privilege of being able to hear the space between tones and the space between rhythms very accurately, and they never have an issue with it. I feel like I am on the opposite end of that spectrum. I feel like I have to work very hard in order to hear things clearly. And every day it's like I hit the reset button, which is just the reality of it. And I don't think it's a bad thing anymore. I think that actually clues into some things about my form of expression that I can tap into, that other people who don't hear and experience music that way cannot. And that's what makes an individual an individual. And I would hope with this book that we can find ways for all people who want to pursue music and rhythm, specifically rhythm in the book, and mental health, relationships, and you pursue these things together and be able to more clearly express yourself. Um, because there's also the other side of the spectrum where you ignore all this stuff and just freely do whatever, which is also a valid way to express yourself. But I think eventually there's a story to be told in this language that, once you learn the language and the mechanics of it, um, you'll be able to say things that you weren't previously able to say as clearly or as concisely. I know I keep saying that in time. I know this is getting kind of long, but the last thing I'll say is that I think there are enough books written on harmony, and that if we're just looking at harmony and neglecting how rhythm interacts with that harmony, and we haven't studied rhythm the same way, that harmony is kind of arbitrary, isn't it? Like, and that may be a simple thing for a lot of people, and it may come intuitively, but for me, it took a long time for that to really, really sink in, that there's a certain threshold for which the harmony and the rhythm have to interact for it to sound cohesive. and you have to learn that balance of tension and release. And you can do this from listening to great recordings, but I also think there's a way to practice this that opens up your fluidity for being able to push and pull on this. And I just have not found a single book, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, that really dives into this the same way that I'm trying to dive into this. And my hope is that with this book and with this research that I'm going to do exactly what I set out to do. And it may feel a little academic, but it's really about sitting down and doing the work. And I guess I'll give a quick demonstration of something that I've been doing so you get an idea of like kind of where the book is going. And we'll start, just the end of this video will be just the rhythmic part. So we have a tune in our band Golden Flower called Dream Fever that Patrick Moreno wrote. And the last section of the tune is in 6/4. You can say it's in 6/4, you can say it's in 12/8, you can say it's in long 3/4. It depends on how you're feeling it and you're thinking about it. But the main pulse is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so the first part of the book is just to talk about pulse and subdivision of the pulse. So then we talk about like what's the smallest subdivision we're going to deal with when we start playing other rhythms and feeling that accurately. And so if we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we want to cut that in half, or I guess double it. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1. And then we double that again. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a 6 E and a 1. And so the groove in the song doesn't follow that pulse, but it puts kind of like a rhythmic, either a polyrhythm, a hemiola, cross rhythm, however you want to think about it. There's a lot of names for these things that haven't been, in my opinion, they haven't all been synthesized for what they are. And there's probably some people who will say it's a polyrhythm or it's this or that, or it's another pulse. But the bass line is essentially putting 4 beats over every 3 beats. So if we're just going to break it down now to 3, so 1, 2, 3, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. We're going to put every 3, so here's the math part of it, every 3 16th notes, we're going to put an accent. So it'd be like 1 E and a 2 E and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. And then you put those together, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1. So that, for a lot of people, might be very simple. But what I want to add to this conversation is to do 2 more things with those rhythms, which is what I'm going to call a composite rhythm, which is to play the pulse, which is 1, 2, 3, or all the way up to 6, with those other rhythms. And you can take this as slow as you need, and that's the biggest part of all of this, is to internalize it. Do it with your hands, do it with your feet, do it with your mouth. Say it out loud, just clicking sounds with your tongue, whatever you need to do to physically embody. Because what I think happens with, like, especially drum set, is that these musicians who play drum set are masters at rhythm because they're dealing with 4 limbs sometimes, and then sometimes singing 5th edition. Well, and it also depends on what they're playing. You know, they're dealing with that many rhythms at once. So you get this kind of rhythmic harmony. And that's just like the very basic way of considering all of that stuff, because then within each of those, you could be adding more things. And this is sometimes how we get amazing drum solos, is you can mask rhythms within other rhythms across instruments and the way you voice things and phrasing. So with this, the composite rhythm then is just simple enough. It's going to be both. So let's just do 3, because it is a bar of 6, right? But in this 3/4 sense, we're going 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a bomb. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and. But now we want to bring both hands and maybe take it a little bit slower to do both at the same time. So 1 E and a 2 E and a, and I'll get this right eventually. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2, etc., as I make mistakes. But more the demonstration purposes. The mistake part of it is part of realizing how many repetitions you need to do before it's correct, how slow you need to take it. I realize now that I'm saying some of this stuff before I've worked on it, and that's part of the book as well, is to sit and work with these different things and internalize them. Because I've done this work on the bass, right? But I haven't done this work just separate with just my fingers. And that's the other thing, is you want to create these connections in your brain in order to internalize those figures. Because what ends up happening when you've worked on the rhythm a certain amount is you now have the freedom within the pulse and the beat and the way you're hearing everybody else's parts to start moving things around, either forward or back, which is more concepts for later. I mean, this is deep. It's very deep, and it's not supposed to be academic, but it's supposed to be all about feel. And I think what happens a lot of the times, we get into the discussion of feel too early, or too vaguely, because what feel really is to me is how you articulate, how you cut off notes, especially when you're playing a sustained note, and what part of the beat you're playing on, in relationship to both the pulse and the subdivisions, and if there's a polyrhythm. And this gets into a whole other thing, and this video is almost 18 minutes as it is. So I think that's enough for now, but thank you so much for watching this. I hope this garners some interest for what I'm doing, and if not, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I hope it garners some interest. So so thank you for watching this. Thank you for sticking around for 17 and a half minutes, and I will talk to you soon.